Across America's industrial heartland, factory floors are going quiet. Orders are slowing, inventories are piling up, and the once promising post-pandemic manufacturing boom is fading fast. According to the latest data from the Institute for Supply Management, U.S. manufacturing activity has now contracted for 10 straight months, the longest downturn since the Great Recession. For an economy that prides itself on resilience, this slump is raising a serious question. Is the U.S. heading toward stagflation? Let's unpack what's happening. Manufacturing was supposed to be one of America's comeback stories. In 2021 and 2022, after years of offshoring, U.S. factories surged back to life. Companies were reshoring production to protect supply chains, building semiconductor plants in Arizona, and expanding EV assembly in the Midwest. The federal government poured billions into subsidies through the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, promising a new manufacturing renaissance. But fast forward to late 2025, and the picture looks very different. Orders for durable goods have fallen sharply. Industrial output is slipping. Even sectors that were booming, like electric vehicles, heavy machinery, and consumer electronics, are facing cutbacks. The reasons? A perfect storm of high interest rates, cooling global demand, and persistent inflation. Let's start with interest rates. The Federal Reserve's aggressive tightening cycle to control inflation has made borrowing far more expensive. For manufacturers, that means higher costs for equipment financing, construction loans, and expansion projects. Many firms that plan to open new plants or scale production are now delaying or canceling those investments altogether. At the same time, global demand is weakening. Europe is teetering on the edge of recession. China's growth is slowing, and exports from the U.S. are down. American manufacturers, especially those in machinery, steel, and semiconductors, are feeling the pinch. Even domestic demand has cooled as consumers pull back on big-ticket purchases like cars and appliances. But here's the catch. While growth is slowing, prices aren't falling. Input costs for energy, raw materials, and transportation remain stubbornly high. Wages, too, continue to rise as companies struggle to find skilled labor. The result? A painful squeeze where economic activity is weakening, but inflation stays elevated. That combination, slowing growth plus sticky inflation, is the textbook definition of stagflation. It's been decades since the U.S. last faced a real stagflation threat. In the 1970s, oil shocks sent prices soaring while productivity stagnated, leading to years of economic malaise. The situation today isn't identical, but the warning signs are flashing. Consider energy. Oil prices have climbed back above $90 a barrel after OPEC cut production, and geopolitical tensions in the Middle East have only added uncertainty. Natural gas prices are also creeping higher, driving up utility costs for both households and factories. For manufacturers, energy isn't just a bill, it's a lifeline. Rising costs here ripple through the entire production chain. Then there's the labor issue. Despite the slowdown, the job market remains tight. Manufacturers can't find enough welders, technicians, and engineers to fill vacancies. That keeps upward pressure on wages, which in turn keeps inflation alive, even as output declines. Some economists say what we're seeing is a stagflation-light scenario, not a full-blown crisis, but a stubborn mix of slowing production and elevated costs that could last for years. And that poses a real challenge for the Federal Reserve. Raise rates further, and it risks crushing what's left of industrial growth. Cut rates too soon, and inflation could surge again. It's a delicate balancing act with no easy answers. The consequences are already visible on Main Street. In states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, factory layoffs are creeping back. Smaller suppliers that depend on large manufacturers are closing or consolidating. The trucking industry, which thrives on moving raw materials and finished goods, is reporting softer demand. Meanwhile, some of the government's marquee manufacturing investments are hitting roadblocks. The massive semiconductor fabs in Arizona and Texas are facing delays due to high construction costs, labor shortages, and slowing chip demand. EV factories that once couldn't keep up with orders are now scaling back production as consumer demand cools. It's a stark contrast to the optimism of just a few years ago, when policymakers touted "Made in America" as the foundation for a new economic era. Now, some of those same policies are under scrutiny. Critics argue that subsidies and tariffs have distorted markets, while others say the government hasn't done enough to fix structural problems, like labor training and supply chain inefficiencies. The political pressure is building too. With an election year approaching, both parties are racing to claim they can revive manufacturing. But behind the campaign promises, the economic math is getting harder. When costs are rising and demand is falling, no amount of rhetoric can force factories to produce more. Still, not everyone sees doom ahead. Some analysts argue that the manufacturing slump may be temporary, a correction after years of overheated growth. They point to signs of stabilization in housing and construction, and new technologies like AI-driven automation that could eventually boost productivity and offset labor shortages. If energy prices ease and inflation gradually declines, the U.S. could escape the worst-case scenario. But others aren't so sure. The manufacturing slowdown is exposing deeper vulnerabilities in the economy. Dependence on global supply chains, insufficient workforce development, and aging infrastructure. If those issues remain unaddressed, the slowdown could stretch into a full-blown stagnation period, especially if inflation refuses to retreat. In short, America's factories are sending a warning. The economic engine that once powered U.S. prosperity is losing steam, even as prices remain high. The combination is dangerous: slow growth, persistent inflation, and eroding business confidence. So, is the U.S. headed into stagflation? Not officially, not yet. But the symptoms are all there. And unless policymakers, businesses, and the Fed find a way to reignite productivity without reigniting inflation, the country could be looking at a decade defined not by crisis, but by something subtler and harder to escape: a grinding economic stall. Because the real threat isn't just a recession, it's getting stuck in a cycle where growth fades, costs rise, and recovery never quite takes hold. And right now, that's exactly where the U.S. manufacturing story seems to be heading.